Hey everyone, I'm excited. We have a very exciting episode about the book Nation of Homeowners by Nick J. Gouché. It's going to be an amazing interview, and we are going to talk about the book. We're going to talk about the motivation for the book and answer your burning questions about homeownership and how it's still possible in 2025 and beyond. So I'm going to introduce Nick. We're going to talk about his background, and then we'll jump right into the questions. So Nick J. Gouché, also known as America's billion-dollar banker, is a visionary leader who believes that honoring our creator comes through individual excellence. From his beginnings in the inner city, Nick rose to become one of the top 1% mortgage professionals in the nation, achieving self-made millionaire status before the age of 40 and serving as one of the youngest presidents of a prominent minority-owned financial services firm. Having lent over $1 billion in home loans to American families, Nick now dedicates his success to inspiring others through powerful storytelling. Yet his greatest accomplishment remains his role as a devoted husband and father to 4 beautiful children. Nick, how you feeling?
Blessed. After hearing that, super blessed, brother. I'm thankful to you. This has been long overdue, and we've been talking about this for years now. And the fact that we can do this together is a blessing.
Absolutely. So let's jump right into it. So Nick, what inspired you to write the book Nation of Homeowners?
I saw a study that says 61% of American renters believe that no matter how hard they work or how much they save, owning a home is out of reach. Now, with context, that is 28 million families, Black families, white families, Hispanic families, Asian families who believe that hope has now subsided and they can't raise their kids to homes that they own. It's not true. It can happen and it will happen. And the book was meant to inspire that action that is possible.
I love it. What do you think is the source of that hopelessness people are feeling?
I think, right now is if you look at the average family today, the mortgage payment on average is too damn expensive. It's 50% of their monthly income. And so it's very difficult in many markets, we're here in LA, to afford to buy a home. But the reality is that if we go back through history, you will see that this is very similar to 2005, 1995, 1985, 1965, 1945, and 1929. We're in a cycle right now. And so that hopelessness feels warranted because when you want to buy a property and you see that mortgage payment, you're like, damn, I can't do that. But if they just knew with some time and some patience, if they knew where they were in the cycle right now, that if we had the right plan in place with persistence and hope, it's possible. That was the goal.
I love it. And it leans perfectly into the next segment. So I'm going to read a portion of the book and then go into a question. Because
Sure.
I think it's important for people to have real life examples, which there are many inside of the book. So this will be one of some that we talk about. So Grace was a single mother, and she attended your first ever homebuyer workshop. And she doubted that she could ever own a home after watching her parents lose everything in the '08 crash, as unfortunately many families did. And she made a vow for her son's future to purchase her first home in 2014. And eventually she was able to use her equity to help her son pay down his student loans. And so when Nick walked into that workshop in 2011, she wasn't looking just for a house. She was searching for hope, which you talk about a lot inside of the book. And you write that you had to become skilled at giving hope, and as you were guiding people to their loans. And so how important is that emotional shift in someone's home ownership journey?
Wow. A wise man once said that the average person can go 40 days without food, 4 days without water, 4 minutes without breathing, 4 seconds without hope. Hope is everything. And if you recognize you're dealing with human nature, we all have hopes, we have dreams, we have desires. And many times, if you find yourself in a moment in time like now, where you feel like that hope and dream is out of reach, this is not good for society. And so in our business, somebody may have a hope that might just be delayed, right? But delayed does not mean defeat. And so many times our job is to help people, guide them to stay persistent with that dream, that they cannot give up on that dream. And for me, I've sat at the table with thousands of families, and I've seen what happens when that hope is removed, when the hope is sustained. And if, as much as my job is to help people with loan programs and pricing and interest rates and structuring the right deal, we have to keep them in the right frame of mind on why we're doing this. And if you can find their motivation for somebody and keep them reminded, you can keep that burning desire for them to stay the course until it comes true. And that's our job.
I love that. And in the example of Grace, it wasn't that she came to the workshop and bought her home 30 days later. It actually was several years. So the question I have for you is, how did you keep going and encouraging her and staying the course until she was able to buy a home, and also keep her going at the same time?
This is personal for me because I grew up with a mother not named Grace. Her name was Jeanette. And she raised two boys, me and my brother Victor. And we moved 18 times growing up. A lot of instability, a lot of trying to fit in new neighborhoods. And my mother had hopes and dreams, just like Grace did. And many times she was in a position to where if somebody just gave her hope and a plan, it could have changed the outcome of me and my brother's life. Now, I'm glad on how things turned out. You know, for me, everything works out in God's timing. But the reality is that there are millions of people like my mother who are like Grace, where if they had somebody who truly cared and could help remind them on why it's important for them to stay the course and give them belief, because belief is more important than action. If I can't help you to believe that it's possible and give you a plan, no need to take an action. But if I can plant the seed of belief in someone, they'll take the action themselves. And so I built a career, I built a movement on that kind of care.
Love that. Love that. I want to read another portion of.
Man, you got me pumped up, though. I mean, you got me. Oh, let's go.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So, Nick, in the book, you compare two families. So the Stewarts who purchase a home and the Hendersons who choose to continue renting. And over 10 years, the homeowners built over $300,000 in wealth, while the renters' savings erode. So the question is, obviously you paint a sobering picture in the book of the outcome of these two families, both starting with the same $20,000, in fact. And the other ends up with less than when they started, and one of them ends up with more, right? That's just the reality of what happened. So what do you say to families who are still renting, not because they want to, but because they don't see a way out?
I don't want to pretend this is not easy to do, because let's take that family, for example, who lives in LA, okay, who did everything the right way. Dad, went to school, went to college, got married. They both were educators. They both, have degrees. They did this the proper way. And they were told that, owning a home is the next part of the American dream. And they want to reach for that dream. And today that dream is out of reach. So someone in that space today has to know that we've been here 7 times in the last 70 to 80 years. Every generation has gone through this. So to that family, that family existed in 1980 when interest rates were 18 to 20%. And so that person maybe has grandparents who would tell you, I'm going to give you a quick case study on this. My grandparents, when they bought their property in the mid-1960s, my grandmother would tell you that they thought it was impossible to own a home. When they came out here from Cleveland and came out here from Texas, they had their kids, they tried to buy a property. They couldn't afford it at the time. Even though my grandfather, went to the Navy and he came with his VA bill, he could not qualify to buy that property. And they had about a few years, they thought it was not possible. A few years later, the market changed, rates came down, prices were more affordable again, and they bought that property. So if that family knew, do not lose hope. It is possible. Let's get a plan together, and let's be very diligent on that plan, and it is possible. So I told that family, like Jesse Jackson would say, keep hope alive.
I love it. I love it. We're building up. We're building up pretty good here.
Yeah.
So the next excerpt I'm going to read really talks about how far back this dream of ownership has been in the world. And I think it'll actually surprise a lot of people when we read this and talk a little bit more about it. So the aspiration of home ownership in medieval England was driven by the desire for stability, autonomy, economic prosperity, social status, and a deep connection to the community. These fundamental desires continue to inspire the goal of home ownership in modern society. So in chapter 2, you take us back. You take us way back, like thousands of years ago, to show that this is not a modern dream. This is something that people have dreamed about for generations and generations. And so why do you think this aspiration has survived all of the eras, all of the ups, all of the downs? Why do people still strive for this?
Well, you have to understand Maslow's theory, the hierarchy of human needs. This is human nature. Once we can survive, we have safety, we have belonging, we want self-esteem. We want to control our destiny. And nothing controls your destiny like owning the home, living in the home that you own. This goes back for 1,000 years. I mean, going back to the medieval time, you're talking about, lords and serfs. You're talking about feudalism. You're talking about the people who controlled their destiny with those who own land. This is 1,000 years ago, longer than that. And so if you understand human nature, you understand what drives people. Once we can survive and we're safe and we have community, we want to control our own destiny. And nothing controls destiny like owning your home.
I love that. And it ties right into the next excerpt and really builds upon it. And so owning land or a home provided a crucial buffer against uncertainty. And there's a whole lot of uncertainty for many reasons these days. And it ensured families had a secure place to live, work, and raise their children. That foundation of stability created a launching pad, not for survival, but for dignity and progress. And so we talk a lot about home ownership as a financial milestone, right? It's a big accomplishment to purchase that home. And you frame it as something as a source of emotional and generational stability. So something that'll outlast those who are purchasing a home. So for example, the home that you have with your family, the impact will outlast, you and your wife when you're no longer here. Your family will still reap the benefits and they'll still feel the impact of that one decision. And so why do you think that distinction is important in a world today where things seem, volatile and all over the place?
Because people have to understand the full story of human nature. I think about how unsettling it was to move so many times. I didn't do well in school. It's not because I wasn't smart. I mean, I was in 4th grade and I was like one of the best kids in math. But the reality was that when I had to move, I couldn't focus on my grades. I had to focus on trying to fit in this new neighborhood. I had to take the weekend to move my things again. I had to think about how I was going to get from my school to my new home safely. And so those things, for a child, destabilizes a kid. And a home gives you that foundation, something that you can always go back to. In the book, we make it, we really go deep with this. I mean, you can look at studies, 74% of families who are renting to not own a home, so they have better health. Kids, this is a study by Harvard Institute. Kids who are raised in homes that their parents own do better in school, better self-confidence, higher self-esteem. Beyond that, kids who grow up in homes their parents own are 3 times likely to own a home themselves when they become adults, because we are shaped by our environments. You see? And so the reality is that if we understand these added components, the conversation is not just about building wealth, which is a very important component. This is about human progress, human dignity. This is about a country, a nation of people who have that same dignity, who are proud of that country. That's a nation of homeowners. That's the vision for this book.
Love it. And talk a little bit more about just that experience as a child. Just, you're a child. You can't control what's going on around you, but you continually have to make these mental switches and physical, obviously, and navigating that. Can you talk more about just that experience?
4 months ago, I said goodbye to my brother, 39 years old. 20 years ago, he was 19. He was shot. He was shot 5 times in a drive-by shooting. Many ways our environment shaped us. But that story is a story of many kids in this country who, without the stability, without the security, the foundation, now you go searching for that security, that brotherhood, that community, that belonging, that self-esteem, and sometimes we find it in the wrong places. This is deep in terms of the human emotion, human nature, and what it means to us to have a family who are stable. A home does that. So again, for me, I appreciate my journey because this is bigger than just helping families buy homes and financing those homes, which is what I do for a living. This is about trying to raise a new generation of people who have hope, security, stability, because they grow up and they become the future citizens of this nation. And they make a stronger nation when they have more stability, where they have more security, where they have higher self-esteem. And owning a home does that.
Very well said. I agree 100%. So earlier in the conversation, you talked about how we've been where we are now before and how, they've been ups and downs throughout the years.
That's right.
And one of the things you talked about is the early 1980s, which is the foundation for our next excerpt. And I'm excited because I don't know that a lot of people really understand and make that connection between back then and what's happening now.
Sure.
So I think there's a lot to capture from here. So it reads as follows. In the early 1980s, mortgage rates soared to nearly 20%. Americans were allocating over 50% of their monthly income towards housing. However, they still persisted. Baby boomers weathered the storm and today control over $80 trillion in wealth. So Nick, in this excerpt, you remind us about the boomers and that they faced the challenge of crazy interest rates, as we are seeing to some extent now, but they built massive wealth still. And today they own tons of wealth collectively. So what do you think gave them confidence to persist and continue to pursue that dream of homeownership?
Time. I mean, if you go back to 1980, 1981, America had 2.9 million units sold of homes. That's to this day, that's the smallest amount of homes sold on record in the last century. So there are times that it might not be your year, but it doesn't mean that's your life. And many times when you lose hope in the spirit, it's because you don't have the right frame of reference. Human beings are so emotional to what's happening this weekend, what's happening today, and the reality is that I am trying to prevent a colossal mistake for many people who it might be their time just in 1 year. And they might have a good credit score, they might have the job, the savings, but if they lose that hope, they'll take that $25,000 and they'll go trick it off on a vacation, or they'll go buy a car because they cannot delay their need to be patient. And so those are our grandparents. They went through a year where it was not their time. They had to be patient. And many times in life, you can't connect the dots looking forward, only backwards. And the beauty in history, as they say, this is a cross-digging, this is a Mark Twain quote, is history doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme. And if we can get people to understand the rhythm of the market, the rhythm of the time, and trying to convey this message out, maybe I can get a few people, maybe a few 100,000, which is our goal, to be patient and say, you know what? I didn't think about that before. He's right. Let me give this some more time. And that time will come.
What do you think people should do in the meantime while they're waiting for their opportunity?
Get ready. Get ready. Get ready. Get ready. Where are you on your credit score? Can we make it better? Where are you at your job? Have you maximized your skill sets at your work? Where are you at with your savings? Maybe if you have 15,000, maybe the goal is the next 12 months, I'm going to save 5. Let's start doing budgets. How much do we just waste without even looking, eating out, entertainment, Starbucks. I mean, I love Starbucks, but not to the point where it's going to stop me from buying a property, right? If you can get people to get ready and positioned, then you would have a whole new set of people by the hundreds of thousands ready when their time comes. And what does that mean? If rates come down just by 1%, brother, this is a fact. Rate drop down by 1%, that's 3 million new people who can buy a property.
Mm-hmm.
Just a 1% interest rate drop. And so there's so much that we could do now. Our job is to build a monumental movement to get them ready.
I love it.
Told you I'm pumped. I'm just getting ready.
Warming up.
I'm just getting, that's it.
So the next excerpt builds on that.
Yep.
And it says, despite rising rates, dwindling savings, and economic fear, 84% of Americans still say they want to own their own home. Their desire hasn't changed, but the access has. So one of the things that you emphasize in the book is that the homeownership dream hasn't died, which is great, but the access to it has just narrowed a bit. So what would you say are the biggest barriers now that didn't exist in the past? And what are some things prospective homeowners can do just to break through some of those barriers?
Wow. It's a good question. Some things are a matter of policy. For example, our supply of homes does not meet the number of people and families formed today. We're behind by at least 9 million homes that need to be built. So some of that is policy decision-making. Regulation, what it costs to build a home. I saw a study on this just a few weeks ago. The average cost in regulatory cost to build a property, $90,000. Almost 100 G's in regulation burden that can be freed up and passed on that savings to the actual customer. Federal debt is incredibly affecting interest rates. When you have a nation who generates $4.7 trillion in tax revenue and spends over $6 trillion and has a deficit of $2 trillion, that debt is eaten up by the federal prints more money. That by itself is an inflationary act, which drives up interest rates. So these are things that policymakers can help fix. What we can do with people on our side in the private market is focused on hope and strategy. So I tell the story all the time. One of the properties that we sold, the city of Compton, we had a family who came in to buy that property who loved the home. It was renovated. It was gorgeous. The house is pristine. And family lady walked in with all of her credentials, USC master's degree. She's an educator, makes $180 a year, drives a great car. She wanted that property, couldn't afford it. She had too much debt, no room left for a mortgage payment. A month later, another family comes in who makes $55,000 a year, but they had 3 people to buy with. 55, 30,000, 47. Collectively, they made what she made without all the debt. We closed escrow in 17 days. Why does that matter? Because Gen Zers, for example, 60% tell you that they would rather do what they call a lending hack, buy with somebody else to increase their buying power. So we can go across the nation on strategies that we can do to increase our buying power to capture homeownership. That's what we can do.
Absolutely. From a regulatory and policy perspective, what are some things that you think those folks should consider to ease this burden that everyone really is feeling throughout the whole supply chain, including the consumer?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's choking supply chains. This summer, I have a white paper coming out. Now, this is incredible, by the way. And it's called Restoring the American Dream. And it's a 70-page paper I'm working on with 2 economic researchers to look at what could be done. a lot we could do. One of the things I gave you one in there too is today, there's 620. So today the federal government owns 27% of all U.S. land. That's 620 million acres of land owned by the government. Over 20% is in dense urban areas that are ripe for new housing to be built for families. If you could create a 1% allocation of that land, that's 6 million acres of land, to the private market, you can create 24 million new homes at 2,000 square feet homes today. Just give 1% of the land to private market citizens, businesses who can develop that land. And if you can do that, now you create more supply in the market, which would drive down the cost per home. I mean, we went through a lot of detail in this, but that's just one example.
Makes a lot of sense.
That's crazy, right? Bro, 6.2 million acres of land, 1%, 24 million new homes you can build.
Why do you think it hasn't been done yet?
That's a whole nother podcast, man. But I would tell you that policymakers have to be forced by the people to do things. Policymakers, by their nature, like to keep the status quo because it keeps their jobs in place, right? And every regulation is another job, somebody else's salary. So the people have to demand the change. They have to demand outcomes at scale. But this cannot be an issue on the basis of race. It has to be on the basis of class. I'll give you an example. Right now, today, 88% of the stock market is owned by 12% of households. So 88% own 10% of the wealth in the stock market. This is now becoming a class issue. We spend so much time, talking about issues on the matter of race, rightfully so. But there's a larger issue at play, and that is the greatest wealth gap in this country is the gap not between black and white. It's between the renter and the homeowner. And our job is to create more national discussion around that to have more collective outcomes.
Love it. Speaking of that, can you talk a little bit more about how that's more how home ownership is more of a driver of gaps between different people?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you look at, for example, the average household today, let's say the average African-American family has a median wealth of like $50,000, $44,000 to be exact. Hispanics, $48,000, white families, $255,000. So you look at the black and white gap, so that's a 5X difference between the black and white family. Well, the average renting household, that's all races combined, have a median net worth of $10,400. The average homeownership family who owns a home has $400,000. That is over a 10X. That's a 40X. That is a 40X difference in your wealth. 5X wealth between black and white, 40 between the renter and the homeowner. That's all races, religions, creeds, genders, all included. The issue of our time is the gap between the renter and the homeowner.
Why do you think that? Why do you think what you just mentioned isn't highlighted more? And it seems to be other ways that the wealth gap and all this stuff is typically portrayed in mainstream media.
I think people respond to incentives. So, for example, 2017, a report came out called The Road to Zero Wealth that looked at the growing wealth divide in this country. And the study said that if the racial wealth gap is unresolved, the median household wealth for black families will be zero by 2053. Now, because America loves to tell a story about the history in the lens of, being black people being social outcast, being denied access to housing, these things are historically true. But then how do you move forward? And if you are having a conversation on the lens of that basis of history, then it's convenient for these solutions to be the only conversations that people talk about, which means that more important ones can be ignored. And the reality is that how do you ignore the fact it's much more inconvenient to say, listen, today there are 20 million white families who have negative wealth today, which is more than the total black households in America today. That requires a collective problem to be solved. But today there's a gridlock between two sets of ideas. There can be no nuance in those ideas. You're on one side or you're on the other side. The reality is that great minds reject both sides of either or. Sometimes it's both. And you have to find common ground to solve larger problems. And what I'm saying is that if people refuse to do that at the level of policy, then the people have to collectively decide to say, you know what? Yes, there's some issues that matter, and there should be people to solve those problems, but then other people who want to solve problems that affect all American people. And my vision, my objective is to build the kind of movement that could remind people some of these problems are shared beyond race. Now, if we can do that, we can have more positive outcomes for the entire country.
Really love that you mentioned that, because you talk to enough people who are different than you in, let's say, with their race, but maybe they're the same class, you'll find that there's actually a lot more similarities amongst those people, and you actually share a lot of the same frustrations and maybe even hopelessness surrounding home ownership. Is really not that different if people go outside and have conversations and hear different perspectives from other people. So I really appreciate that you mentioned that, because it is a truth that people need to consider, and I think if we, to your point, if we come together to solve these issues, regardless of, race and background and different things like that, there's a level of progress that can be made that I don't think people could even imagine.
Absolutely. I mean, think about this. This is Dr. King's legacy still unfulfilled. We know him for his I Have a Dream speech that our kids in elementary school can recite during Black History Month. But April 1967, he had his dream called the One America speech. One America, where access and prosperity was available to all Americans. That was his unresolved dream. People like you and I have to solve. Remind Americans that we have much more in common than divides us. It does us no good. This is scripture, the book of Matthew. A kingdom divided cannot stand. I have an interest here. I have kids who are proud Americans, proud to be Black. We have to have a nation that fits for all of us. And that's our job.
Do you ever feel like certain people, I don't know if it's public figures or media, have an incentive to keep people divided on the basis of race? Even though we have these things in common, we all share this American dream. We all want to be homeowners, and that is the core thing that we're driving towards. But it seems like there are parties out there who want us to focus on the things that are different about us, with race being an example.
So I try not to get into politics too much because I'm focused on building a great business. But I'll tell you this. This is very this is if you go back to 1949, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party under Mao Zedong, takes power, and he decides that he wants to have a vision called the Great Leap Forward, where he wants to forward the progress of all people in China. You know what that results in? 50 million Chinese people starve to death. So greatest loss of life in human history within a 10-year period. 50 million people. He's losing power, and people are angry with him and his policies. So he decides to create 13 new classes of people by ethnic group, by zoning, where they live. If you can divide the people, you can unite power. And years later, what he created was a cultural revolution, where young people were decided to, upward against the status quo under Mao Zedong's vision to divide and conquer the people. But this is throughout human history. The more you can divide people, the more you can control power and distract people from what matters most. And so I love history because you can see the pattern and how it rhymes. Yes, I do believe there's incentives to control power by distracting people on things that don't matter as much. What matters is that we live in a country, we live in a world now that is competing for supremacy. We live in a world where people like China, who have their own issues, they have a Chinese dream for their kids. In India, Prime Minister Modi has a vision for an Indian dream for their kids. The UAE has a dream to unify all their kids. And every single country I just mentioned, they have their own issues historically that still have to still resolve. But they have something within them, which is a hope for their kids. They can all share in that prosperity. I'm reminded of that. That is my dream. That is my vision, that my son, that my daughters get a chance to share in that American prosperity. We have to do that together.
Love it. And I believe Nation of Homeowners can help us come together and help us make that progress so everyone can share that American dream of home.
That's the vision.
So as we wrap up this first episode of the Nation of Homeowners book series, we want to remind you to purchase the book. A lot of the things we're mentioning is bits and pieces of the book, but you'll get everything you need in depth here. So Nick, can you let them know where they can purchase the book?
Yes, you can click the link below after this, and you can get the book. But we are going to go on an epic run that is going to remind Americans all across the country what we have in common. That's a hope and a plan for our kids and their future. I'm excited, and we are just getting started. Let's go.